Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Beyond the Cage podcast. I'm your host, Jim Graham, alongside my co-host, The Juice, Dave Sadler, and due to some technical difficulties and in part we wanted to try something new this week, so we are doing the whole show live or broadcasted live here on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Beyond the Cage podcast. And of course, if you miss it live, you can watch it on demand whenever you want, because that's really the beauty of YouTube. So it will be up on our YouTube channel later this afternoon if you aren't able to watch it live, as we did a little early this morning, but we wanted to make sure we had enough time to do the show this week. So there really won't be rounds, so to speak, this week, because I can't cut up and dice them and slice them like I normally do. So we're kind of just going to do one big show, I guess you could say, and we're going to mainly cover and break down the fights from UFC on Fox 10 this past weekend, which Dave was live and in person for there at the United Center in Chicago. And we will also pick the main card fights for UFC 169 this weekend in New Jersey. So that's what we're going to cover. And before we start, how was your weekend? Most importantly, how was your experience once again going to the United Center for a UFC fight, Dave?
Good. But first of all, this isn't like a normal Beyond the Cage, Jim, like you said. This is like a regular fight. You just never know when it's going to end. Is it going to end in round one? Round two? Nobody knows. Hopefully it doesn't go to the judges, because could get bad. Could get real bad.
Most definitely.
No, but UFC Live is awesome. If you've never been, you need to go. Every time Bruce Buffer announces the main event, I always record it on my phone. It's pretty awesome. Got to meet up with our good friend Ray Flores, a couple guys I know from SureDog. Matt Scarro was there. Shake some hands with, Ricardo Lamas. Got to shake his hand, take a picture. Saw some other people roaming around. So all in all, a good time. And unfortunately, I have to work for 169, but that's the beauty of the DVR. So I'll DVR 169 and, watch it later.
Absolutely, and as we look at UFC on Fox 10, of course, 4 fights were on the main card. And just real quickly before we get to that, you mentioned Ray Flores. We were actually supposed to have him on the show this week. We had some technical problems. We weren't able to get him on, but we definitely got to pass along that he actually will be doing a podcast of his own. It'll be a little different from ours, so don't worry. So don't switch over and run to Ray Flores' podcast. Still listen to Beyond the Cage, but his podcast will focus more on interviewing people not only within the world of mixed martial arts, but boxing. So he'll kind of cover the whole realm of combat sports, so to speak, and his podcast will be called Fighting Words, and you can hear that on the ESPN 1000 Chicago website, which is ESPNradio1000.com, and he'll be doing that, I believe, every week or every other week. He'll get interviews, and that's kind of mainly going to be his show, more interview-based, where, of course, Dave and I give you great expert analysis on fights. So it'll be a little different than ours, so definitely check it out, and I'm really looking forward to that, because Ray's great having on, and definitely great that he got this opportunity with the folks up there at ESPN 1000.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure you check him out on the website, and he said you can also subscribe to it on iTunes, so make sure that you definitely do that on iTunes. And if you're in the Chicagoland area, make sure you go to Wingstop for all your wing needs. That was the big sponsor that's giving him this break, so let's help him out.
Absolutely, and of course we want to wish a big congratulations to our friend Darren Cruikshank, who we had on before UFC on Fox 10 and his fight against Mike Rio, and he had a tremendous performance on the undercards. And even though he didn't win it with that spinning back kick, Dave, it was still pretty awesome to see Darren bust out that, and really a lot of spinning attacks throughout the fight, and he just kind of overpowered Mike Rio with his stand-up prowess, and did a great job, for the most part, shutting down Rio in the takedown department, and that was all Darren in that fight.
Yeah, that was pretty good performance for Darren. You know, we've talked about this before, and not to doubt or cast a bad light on a victory, but it seems like Darren, those first couple of minutes in his fight, sometimes just doesn't want to engage, maybe, or it just takes a little bit to get warmed up. And once he gets that figured out, there's bright things coming for Darren in the future.
Well, let's get to the main card here, Dave. The first fight of the night was at 145 pounds as Jeremy Stephens took on Darren Elkins. And looking over the stats, Dave, even though it was apparent that Jeremy Stephens was dominating this fight, not just with the stand-up, but he completely shut down Darren Elkins, taking him down, as Elkins was 0 for 9 in the takedown category. But if you look at actually total strikes according to Fight Metric, which are the official stats for the UFC, Stephens only outstruck Elkins 40-26, which you would have thought the way that Stephens was hitting Elkins with some of those big bombs, especially with his punches, you would have thought the striking disparity would have been far greater than 14, but that's where it stands. And really, again, the story of this fight was Stephens was able to shut down Elkins, and once Elkins wasn't able to get to the takedown, there really wasn't much that he could do stand-up-wise to try to counteract what Jeremy Stephens brings to the table.
Yeah, hey, Jim, with the stats that you have in front of you, you said the disparity was 14. What was it significant strikes? Does it say that?
It's funny because all of Jeremy Stephens' strikes were significant, so, which for him I think is probably one of the few guys you could say that about, as all 40 of his strikes were significant, whereas Elkins, 21 of his 26 total strikes landed were significant, which I think is a pretty high clip because I didn't think 21 of his strikes were significant. But yeah, even if you look at that, there's still a pretty big disparity.
Yeah. This fight, it just came down to Elkins needed to get the fight to the ground. He couldn't, and Jeremy Stephens picked him apart for 3 rounds. Darren Elkins is a tough guy. Just like you said 1,000 times before, brings his lunch pail in to the cage, puts his honest day's work in, and then he gets out of there. He was unable to get the takedown, and that's definitely something he's going to have to work on moving forward, because that's where he's the strongest, and if he can't get it there, it's going to be long nights for him moving forward. On the other hand, Jeremy Stephens, that's 4 in a row now in his new division.
I believe 3.
3 in a row. That nice little run, dropped down in weight, now on a 3-fight winning streak. So, good for Jeremy Stephens. Knocked out a top 10 guy, so he should definitely probably get another top 10 guy in this next fight. So
maybe a Dustin Poirier?
I think Dustin Poirier may be a little bit higher than that. I don't know.
Maybe, but I think at this stage in both guys' career, that'd be a good fight. And also just, I think from an entertainment factor, that would be a great matchup because both guys have pretty exciting styles.
Yeah, it may be one of those fights where Poirier wants to stay busy, and the fact that Jeremy Stephens has been around for so long, that the one victory over the top 10 guy, plus what he's done in other weight divisions, people may give him benefit of the doubt in the rankings.
Well, let's move on to the next fight of the evening. It was at 155 pounds as the Cowboy Don Cerrone took on the Brazilian Adriano Martins. And Dave, for this one lasting only about a round total, it was very exciting as both guys were showing off their striking prowess, but when it came down to it, the Cowboy and his just overall better technique, I think, prevailed as he was able to land a very brutal head kick or neck kick, whatever you want to call it. I mean, shin right to the dome of Martins, and he just went crashing down to the canvas. Big John had to step in to stop this one at 440. And I tell you what, we've seen a lot of good performances by Cowboy, but if you actually look at his UFC victories, not too many knockouts. So for him to go in there and knock out a guy who, even though he only had one fight in the UFC, a guy that had over 30 fights in his career professionally, a guy that's a huge 155-pound man, a guy that definitely looked like he was primed to shoot up the rankings here, has the potential to shoot up the rankings and be a contender here for a while, the Cowboy quickly dispatched the Brazilian, and it was awfully impressive with that kick.
Yeah, in the time that you did that rundown, Jim, Donald Cerrone actually just spent $50,000.
He might have. I mean, well, let's see. It's only, 9 o'clock Mountain Time, so maybe Walmart just opened or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. Or Target, the mall, I don't know.
Yeah, Donald Cerrone went in, took care of business against a guy that he should have beat. Pretty devastating knockout. And I'll leave you with this on this fight. Nobody wants to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov. Do you think that phone call's been made yet?
Possibly. I mean, we know the Cowboy is one of the few guys in the UFC that likes. I don't know if likes is maybe the right word, but he at least seems to be fighting a lot more so than other guys, and that was kind of like Josh Koscheck a couple of years ago, where he would fight 4 or 5 times in a year, and the Cowboy kind of seems to be in that same mold. And I kind of like that. I wish guys would fight 4 or 5 times a year, and I know sometimes you can't always do that with injuries or whatnot, but if you're able to, why not? I kind of hate only seeing some guys, twice a year. You should be able to fight more than twice in one calendar year.
Right.
And the Cowboy is definitely one of those guys that does that. And yeah, I think Nurmagomedov or Rustam Khabilov or really any of these Russian guys the UFC have got, I think would be very interesting matchups for the Cowboy.
Yeah, the reason I said Khabib is because Cerrone said he wanted to fight 6 times this year. So he fought in January. He's got to hurry up and turn around and fight in March. So they could probably book that Nurmagomedov fight. But, I know our rankings are going to come out after 169, but I just glanced at the UFC, and since they've, for some stupid reason, expanded to 15, there's some fun fights of people below him. Edson Barbosa, Bobby Green, Michael Johnson, Diego Sanchez, and then that Rustam Khabilov. Any of those would be fun with Cerrone.
Absolutely. Those are some very exciting guys, especially that Bobby Green. I tell you what, he has to keep up his hands a little more, but he's definitely a very exciting guy.
Yeah. Is Bobby Green the guy that's on a losing streak? Or that's Volker? Is that Volker that's on the 4-fight losing streak, but they're like, there's no way he's getting cut?
I think so. Yeah, Bobby Volker's definitely lost quite a few fights here in a row. But I think one of those was against Robbie Lawler, so.
Yeah, it was one of the guys, not to go off on a tangent here, but it was one of those guys that was on 168, and then it was on Dana's video blog that they're like, yeah, there's no way you're getting cut. Yeah, Bobby Volker's the guy I'm thinking of.
Okay.
I was like, wow, the UFC ranked him after 4 losses. I was like, their rankings are actually awful.
Yeah, if a guy loses 4 in a row, he shouldn't be anywhere near like the top 30. I mean, it's... All right, well, let's get to the co-main events of the evening, where Stipe Miocic took on Gabriel Napao Gonzaga at heavyweight, and this maybe wasn't as impressive as his win over Roy Nelson a few months ago, Dave, that being Stipe, but a very dominating performance nonetheless. And even though I thought it was a good performance by Stipe, I think it was maybe a worse performance by Gabriel Gonzaga, as it just seemed like he ran out of steam very early in this fight. And then I don't know what his training was coming into this fight, standing up, but he almost showed no footwork to try to circle out or cut angles or really try to get out of the way of Stipe. And when Stipe would come to attack and come into range, Gabriel would just pretty much, since we can do video here, he would pretty much just do this.
Ooh, that's neat.
And take the punches. That was his defense. It wasn't moving out of the way. It was just throwing up his forearms. And that has to be like your last line of defense, not like, oh, he's throwing a punch. Instead of moving out of the way, I'm going to do this. And that's pretty much what he did the whole fight. And it's no wonder he got outstruck 77-33 in this fight.
Yeah. After the fact, it says that Gonzaga broke his hand early in the first round, which I don't think really mattered a whole lot. I talked to Ray about this after the fight, and the victory for Stipe was a big deal, beating somebody like Gonzaga, but Stipe needs to be a tad more, if I do this, does that help any? He needs to be a tad more, not anxious, but he needs to go for it and get the finishes against guys like that. Right now, nobody is going, oh my God, I'm so afraid to fight Stipe Miocic. Now, if he goes out and finishes Gabriel Gonzaga, completely different. Was it a good victory? Yes. Could it have been better? Yes.
Well, let's get to the main event where it appears that another fighter broke their hand, and that's Josh Thompson, the former Strikeforce lightweight champion, as he took on the former UFC and WEC champion Ben Henderson. And I know a lot of people may be upset with this decision, think that Josh Thompson got robbed, and I do think it was a close fight. Watching it live for 5 rounds of 25 minutes, I thought this fight came down 3 rounds to 2, but I would have gave it to Ben Henderson. And the rounds I scored for Josh Thompson were rounds 1 and I believe rounds 4, and I would have had 2, 3, and 5 for Mr. Henderson, and that's how I scored it. And this is one of those fights, Dave, where when you watch it live, it seems really close, but you go back, you bring up Fight Metric, you look at the stats, which I like to do all the time just to see, and it's amazing that this was a split decision and was so close because Ben Henderson, get this if fans out there haven't seen it, he outstruck Josh Thompson 114-33. There are not that many fights where a guy can outstrike a guy. That's like, 80 strikes? And people
Right.
go, oh, he shouldn't have won. It doesn't happen too often, but yet that was the case on Saturday night. And I know the broken hand had some stuff to do with it, but the fact that Josh Thompson went in there, got outstruck by 80, broken hand, and still almost won this fight is pretty darn incredible.
Two things. When you give me a stat like that, I think to myself that judges are looking at quantity over quality. Because I thought Josh Thompson was landing effective strikes. But you're telling me Ben Henderson landed 80 more? So clearly when the judges are watching it, or the judges who scored it for Henderson, they're looking for quantity, not necessarily the quality of strikes. And then second of all, like I texted you, or I think I told you after the fact, I'm never judging an event that I go to live ever again because I'm awful at it. I scored the GSP fight for GSP, or for I gave it to GSP. The judges gave it to GSP, but everybody else thought it was Hendricks. I gave this one to Thompson. Everybody else thought it should have gone to Henderson. It did go. You know what I'm saying? I can't do it live. It's too hard. But anyway, what do you think? Do you think the judges see quantity over quality?
I think it was part because Henderson, I think, was landing maybe the more impactful strikes, and if you look at the significant strike breakdown, Henderson outstruck Thompson in that category 46-19. Takedowns, they both landed 4, but Henderson was 4 of 4 and Thompson was 4 of 11. So, yes, I think it was a close fight. Maybe I think the fact that Thompson got Henderson's back a couple of times, I think kind of swayed people's minds that he was doing really good. But even though he got the back, he wasn't really close to getting a choke. He didn't really do a lot of damage when he was control in that back position. If you really look back, he didn't throw that many strikes. He really didn't take advantage of that. He was really trying to go for a submission. And I know Anthony Pettis submitted Ben Henderson, but Ben Henderson's a very tough guy to try to go out there and submit. And I think at that point, Thompson should have tried to land more ground and pound. And he really didn't go out there and do that when he had the opportunity to.
Yeah. Hey, what'd you think of Thompson on the back, waving the crowd? What'd you think of that?
It was kind of neat. I mean, I've seen some fighters do that before, and he was kind of getting back because I think didn't Henderson do something like or just before that to try to get the crowd into it or something? So yeah, I have no problem with that, and that's kind of Josh Thompson's always been not comical in the ring, but he's always been a guy that definitely plays up to the fans.
Hey, let's go. It's our show, and I'll go on a tangent if I want to. Did you see this letter from Nate Diaz after this fight?
I saw some blurb about it, but I didn't read about it.
That is a perfect word for my feelings about Nate Diaz. Blurb. That's God, what an idiot. Basically, this guy's talking about how like this was a boring wrestling match. You shouldn't be doing the stuff Thompson did. yada, yada, yada. Man, for a guy that's won one in a row, this guy just constantly needs to be in the news. You know what I'm saying? It drives me nuts, man.
Yeah, I don't know, and I know a lot of people are maybe saying, Henderson's likely to get a shot at Pettis again, but I think both you and I are in agreement as we were preparing for the show that that should not be the case. Ben Henderson should not get the next crack at the lightweight title. And I know he's had injury problems, Dave, but I think TJ Grant versus Ben Henderson, that should be what's next, and the winner of that should fight Anthony Pettis.
Do you feel, well, before I get to this point, I want to show everybody this sweet banner from VigilanteMMA.com. They're one of our cool sponsors. Even though people keep texting me who are watching on YouTube. But anyway, I digress. Do you feel one victory from Ben Henderson over TJ Grant is enough for Pettis? I know you said that, but I'll give you my counter argument. Vitor Belfort lost to Anderson Silva very decisively, and it's taken Vitor to get, 3 or 4 finishes in a row over top guys before they're even talking about him getting another title shot. Ben Henderson was dominated by Anthony Pettis in Anthony Pettis' victory. So is the one victory over TJ Grant, a TJ Grant coming back from over a year off, is that victory going to be enough to give the UFC the ability to book that title fight?
I think so, and of course, you know how I feel about the Vitor situation because you and I are both huge fans of Vitor, and he should have gotten his due long ago, especially with him doing the UFC a solid and taking on John Jones on short notice, moving up a weight class, but that's neither here nor there. I don't want to go off another rant about Vitor not getting a shot, but I think if he comes back and beats TJ Grant, even though I know, like you said, he's had a long layoff, I think the reason it's a little different is because Anthony and Ben had that fight at the WEC, which most people consider one of the best fights of that year and definitely one of the best fights of the last 5 years. And I think that potential for a 5-round fight like that is still very possible, even though Anthony Pettis is now 2-0 on Ben Henderson. And I think the only thing that may stop that in terms of the next fight for Ben Henderson, if he does in fact get TJ Grant and if in fact he does beat TJ Grant, would be if somebody else kind of emerges, and I don't know whether that be a Gilbert Melendez reemerges or one of those Russian guys, like I was saying, Khabilov or Nurmagomedov, if one of those guys kind of get thrusted up there, and that's really the only people I maybe see it. Thompson's talking about retirement. Obviously, if he has a broken hand, he's going to have to rehab that, so it might be too soon for him to come back and then obviously get a fight and win. So those are kind of the other people I would think about, but and I guess one outside thing, and speaking of Vigilante, they brought this up in an article kind of talking about the division. Unless Jose Aldo, if he's successful against Lamas, he wants to move up to 155, and actually we do get that Pettis Aldo fight. Maybe that's what's next for 155.
Yeah, couple counterpoints. Maybe we should change the name to Beyond the Rant. We seem to go off on a lot of those. Beyond the Tangent. I hope it's not Gilbert Melendez, because then that puts Nate Diaz back in the spotlight where he's going to talk, yo, Gilbert's the best in the world, son. We're the best 2 lightweights on the planet, son. And nobody's got time for that. We don't need that. And the lightweight division is a perfect example of, I've said this before, Jim. Let's make sure that there is a number 1 contender. Let's just not throw Gilbert Melendez in there. If they decide he is the number 1 contender, great. But if there's a question on whether or not it should be TJ Grant or Ben Henderson, let's have a fight before they get to Pettis, because I'd rather it be a true number 1 contender than have the title defended every 6 weeks. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and if but they want to have Ben Henderson against somebody else, and you throw Melendez Grant, I'm fine with that, and the winner getting the title shot. But I think TJ Grant has to be involved somewhere in this next couple months here to determine the number 1 contender. And I don't care who he takes on, like I said, the Russian guys, Melendez, Henderson, but I think some way, shape, or form, if he's healthy again, he should be involved in it because he's put together some very impressive victories, and I think because of his size in this division, he presents some interesting problem to the likes of Melendez, Pettis, and Henderson. Well, let's get to UFC 169 on what they call Super Saturday, or if you're at the NFL, you want nothing to do with the UFC or anything else infecting your infallible brand, so I won't say it again. And looking at the fight card, Dave, UFC 169 will feature 5 fights on pay-per-view over there at the Prudential Center in Newark, New Jersey. The first fight of the evening will be at 155 pounds as Abel Trujillo will take on Jamie Varner. I think we're going to see a very, very entertaining contest between these two. And for Jamie Varner, definitely, he can go toe-to-toe with Abel Trujillo standing up for 15 minutes. I think throughout his career, he has proved that he has some very good stand-up, has some very powerful hands, and a guy that can kind of surprise you maybe a little bit sometimes with the stand-up and how good he is at it. But I think the best path and what we've seen Abel Trujillo have trouble with is guys with that wrestling prowess. And even though he has a big, bulking frame, that being Trujillo, and he does have good takedown defense, but if you put the pressure on him, kind of like I believe it was Khabibulov that did that to him, you can take this guy down and get him because he's not as much skilled in that category. And Jamie Varner can certainly do that. And if you're Jamie Varner, maybe you start testing things out and then go for the takedown quickly because Abel Trujillo is a guy you really don't want to mess around with because he's one punch away from ending any fight.
Yeah, this is a perfect way to kick off a big show like this. These guys, it should definitely be a very fun fight. I think that you were spot on with what you said, game plan wise. To me, in this fight, I really do think it comes down to skill set. Jamie Varner should have the superior skill set all around because he's a mixed martial artist. I like this video. You can do this. Mixed martial artist. But like you said, Abel Trujillo is one combination away from knocking Jamie Varner out. So this is one, I would say the longer it goes, the better chance Varner's probably going to have in this fight. But he's got to be ready the entire 15 minutes because Trujillo could end it like that.
And just to give you some background information of the two gentlemen, Jamie Varner's 3-3 in the UFC. His last fight was actually a loss to Gleison Tebow at UFC 164, and of his 21 career victories, 11 are by submission. Trujillo inside the UFC is 2-1 with a no contest, and he kind of avenged that no contest because the guy that was against Roger Bowling, he beat in his last fight at UFC on Fox 9, and 4 of his 11 career victories are by knockouts. And much like the show, even though we are doing it via YouTube, we're going to save our picks for the end. So we're not going to give our picks just yet. Looking at the next fight of the evening at flyweight, or 129 or so for John Lineker, as he takes on Ali Baugatinov. Looking at Lineker, he is 4-1 in the UFC, currently riding a 4-fight win streak. His last fight was a victory over Phil Harris at Fight Night 30, and 11 of his 23 career victories are by knockout. Looking at Baugatinov, he is 2-0 in the UFC, riding a 10-fight overall win streak. His last fight was a victory over Tim Elliott at UFC 167, and 5 of his 12 career victories are by knockout. And we all know the Brazilian Lineker has incredible hands. He has knocked out a lot of people in his career, most of them inside the first round, and he can very much do that to Ali. But I think as this fight goes on and the conditioning wears and whether Lineker makes weight or he doesn't make weight, I think may hurt the Brazilian. And we know Baugatinov, I believe both of his UFC fights have gone to the third round. He finished the one, went to decision the other when he beat Tim Elliott. He's a very tough and durable guy, and if he can kind of stick around and hang out and kind of mix things up, maybe go for takedowns, mix it up, don't stay on the feet too long, I think he can beat John Lineker. And I have a very interesting thought that the winner of this fight could very, very much have their next fight be a title shot. And it looks like Dave timed out. So, all right, I will continue on. But yes, I think the winner of this fight definitely has a shot at winning the title not winning the title, but fighting for the title against Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson. Because if you look at our flyweight rankings, again, we'll update them after UFC 169, but I believe currently we have Lineker 5 or 6, and I think Baugatinov is 8 or 9. And obviously, Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson has already beat Benavidez twice. He's beaten Uncle Creepy. He's beaten John Dodson. He's beaten John Moraga. And he's beaten pretty much everybody the UFC has put before him. And to me, realistically, the only person so far that he hasn't fought in terms of the top guy would be Lineker. And I think it's a very, very real possibility, unless they do something boring, but I definitely think Lineker or Baugatinov with a win could face Mighty Mouse Johnson.
Jim, I was gone. I missed something.
I know, I had to stretch for time there.
You know what the weird thing is? I was completely stretching for time on the other side. I was like, make sure you like VigilanteMMA.com, MMAforlife.ca. Apparently, the only person who heard anything was my dog.
Well, I just gave my breakdown of the fight between Baugatinov and Lineker, and also the possibility that the winner could get a shot at the flyweight title.
Well, I can't use my go-to line that your synopsis of the fight was spot on.
Well, I think it was so.
It probably was. So yeah, the biggest fight. This is the biggest fight of the night in my mind. The fight of John Lineker versus the Scale. Dun dun dun. This guy's awesome. Lineker's he's a great fly bantam, whatever you want to call him. Can we call him a flyweight? I don't think he's actually made weight yet.
Yeah, like I said in the opening rundown, I said at flyweight, or if you're John Lineker, 129.
Ish and a half.
Yeah.
Lineker's got the skill set, and if he makes weight, there's no way he's fighting Ali Baugatinov right now. He's fighting a guy like John Dodson or somebody like that to get right to the title. And he needs to get this weight under control, because he's one of those guys that you tune in to watch because you don't know what's going to happen. Little guy like that with all that power. I hope everything is taken care of and he steps on that scale. And I don't know if you mentioned it, but he needs to get it under control, because he can't be coming in at 125.9 or whatever. He needs to get it under control, because if he gets a title shot, there is no 1 pound variant. He has to be at 125. So, Lineker needs to get that under control, because I want to see him do well. Baugatinov, only seen him twice, but he's looked impressive in both fights. And, it's a victory over Lineker is going to do big things for Baugatinov. So this is a huge step forward for whoever takes the victory. And once again, I apologize for bouncing out at the end of the last fight.
It's all right. It's what makes the live show so interesting.
Jim, did you do this at all when I was gone?
No, I did not. Because I was like, reading my notes and everything, and then I kind of looked over. I was like, well, I'm going to continue here with my spiel, and as Dave has departed, so.
As long as you didn't go, and Dave, and threw it to me, and then you were like, all right.
Well, it was more like I realized that you weren't there, but I didn't specifically say, all right, take it away, Dave. So there was no transition or anything or lead into, so I just kind of like, and Dave's not here. But it's all good. It brings some entertainment to the folks watching live. So, or of course on demand, however you're going to watch it. But looking at the next fight of the evening, it will be at heavyweight as Frank Mir takes on Alistair Overeem, and we got this idea from our friend Ray Flores in what will be the WWE Pink Slip match, as the loser will most likely not be with the organization anymore. As I do the opening rundown, you'll see why. Looking at Frank Mir, the former UFC champ, is actually 14-8 overall in the UFC, despite now on a 3-fight losing streak. His last fight was a loss to Josh Barnett at UFC 164, and 9 of his 16 career victories are by submission. Looking at Alistair Overeem, the former Strikeforce heavyweight champion, he is 1-2 in the UFC. His last fight was a loss to Travis Brown at Fight Night 26, and 19 of his 36 career victories are by submission. And to me, really, this comes down not so much to Frank Mir as it does to Alistair Overeem, because Alistair Overeem, even though I said he's 1-2, two-fight losing streak, he could very easily be 3-0 in the UFC. And in fact, he probably should be 3-0 in the UFC because he should have beat Bigfoot Silva. He had many opportunities to put the Brazilian away, but didn't, let Bigfoot around, and he got knocked out. Against Travis Brown, I mean, I know Travis Brown's a tough guy, but he had an opportunity to finish that fight inside the first round, and he couldn't. And he ended up getting knocked out. So Overeem's been close, and I know people maybe he's not people's biggest or fan favorite, with the whole TRT thing. He doesn't maybe have the greatest attitude in the world, kind of rubs some people the wrong way, but the guy is a very talented MMA fighter, and I don't think there's any doubt about that. And it's just more of a mental game with him. He just hasn't been able to put everything together for, heck, even 10 minutes, Dave, to complete a fight, to finish out a fight. And if he can do that, there's no doubt in my mind that he can beat Frank Mir. And for Frank Mir, it's, once again, kind of can he overcome that early storm from Overeem, and can he do something, an ankle pick, a double leg, a single leg, some type of throw? He has to do something to get to the ground because he has decent stand-up skills, but you really don't want to stand up with Alistair Overeem.
You know what's impressive to me? That Alistair Overeem has 50 professional fights, right? He was at light heavyweight, then he moved up to heavyweight. In that time, he's had one 3-fight losing streak, and it was to Little Nog, Ricardo Arona, and Shogun, right? But he's been fighting since 1999. I graduated high school in '98. How old what were you, like 3?
I think I was I think I actually might have still been in elementary school or
Nice.
middle school in 1998.
Nice. So, my basic point, and to go look at Frank Mir, he's been fighting since 2001 and hasn't done anything but a 1-fight losing one fight and then right back on a winning streak. So these guys aren't really accustomed to losing. So I expect both of these guys to come out with all their ducks in a row, I guess is an awful way of saying it. It's come out that Frank Mir, regardless win or lose, he's not done with MMA. So that could be interesting to see somebody like Frank Mir as a UFC let him walk and go to a Bellator or a World Series of Fighting with a loss. And I'm with you on there's a lot of hate for Overeem because of the TRT stuff. I may or may not be on board with that list of people who hate him. But regardless, the public has its opinion, and he's the one who has to deal with that. He's a talented fighter. He can be very exciting. We haven't really seen that in his 3 UFC fights, except for the Lesnar fight. But aside from that, I think strategically this could be a very interesting fight on what we can see. Frank Mir is obviously superior on the ground, but Overeem's got talent on the ground. So where does Mir go? He clearly doesn't want to stand with him, right?
No, I don't think so, and he has to try to do something early because if he messes up with any submission attempts, Overeem has some nasty ground and pound. I mean, this guy's a beast. I mean, there's a reason people call him Ubereem. I mean, this guy is huge. You definitely do not want him on top of you either. And obviously he could submit Overeem, but if Overeem kind of applies what that Brock Lesnar strategy, that chest to chest, and uses those big forearms and punches, I mean, he can grind up Frank Mir easily. But I think it's gonna be a finished fight either way. I think it's either going to be an Overeem knockout or a Mir submission. Somebody's getting finished in this one.
Yep. Somebody's getting finished and somebody's getting a pink slip.
I don't know if it'll be handed to him immediately after Buffer reads the decision, but I would imagine pretty soon after that, right?
When they come back and they take their gloves off and then they cut the tape off their hand.
It's inside the glove.
Well, the doctor signs it. He goes, "Oh, okay, Mr. Overeem, you're good to go." here's your medical stuff, and then Dana's like, and here's your pink slip.
You know how they like pat the fighters down to make sure they're not like hiding anything illegal?
Yeah.
If they're patting them down, they're like, hey, what's this? I found this pink slip. Where did that come from?
Nice.
All right. Well, let's get to the co-main event of the evening for the UFC Featherweight Championship of the World, as Jose Aldo will once again put his title on the line, this time against Ricardo Lamas. Looking at the challenger, Lamas 4-0 in the UFC, currently riding, coincidentally, a 4-fight win streak. His last fight was a victory over Eric Koch at UFC on Fox 6, and 6 of his 13 career victories are by decision. Looking at the champion, Jose Aldo, 5-0 in the UFC, overall a 16-fight win streak for the champ. His last fight, he defended his title successfully over the Korean Zombie, and 14 of his 23 career victories are by knockout. And maybe more so than any of the other fights, Dave, that we have on this card, the strategy for Ricardo Lamas is simple. He has to get in the face of Jose Aldo, clinch him up, work for a takedown, really try to grind and wear down the Brazilian, who at times has shown that his conditioning may not be the best in the world. But if Lamas doesn't do that and stays kind of at distance, kind of at range, and he kind of waits a little bit, Jose Aldo will pick you apart. He's going to hit you with those leg kicks. He's going to hit you with his blazing fast hand speed, and the next thing you know, you're on the canvas knocked out. I mean, this guy is pretty much, I don't know if he's the fastest guy, but I tell you what, there aren't too many who are faster. Maybe Mighty Mouse or a Junior Dos Santos you look at, pound for pound in size, but Jose Aldo is a very electric individual, and a guy that if you give him an inch, he will take it and you will be finished.
Yep, Jose Aldo. I texted Ray this right after the fight. Jose Aldo, true or false, most underrated champ, or underrated's a bad word, most unrecognized champ, under-recognized champ in the UFC? True.
I mean, I would say maybe next to Chris Weidman, because there's that little doubt of people, but I say him and Weidman because even though the flyweights, and we love the flyweights, Dave, and we think they should be represented more as a whole, but I feel like people really do respect Mighty Mouse Johnson, and the UFC just hasn't put him in a pay-per-view in the kind of division as a whole. And obviously we know they love Cain Velasquez, or when Junior Dos Santos was there, George St. Pierre when Anderson Silva was champ. I think Ben Henderson got his due, and even before that, Frankie Edgar. Now obviously Anthony Pettis, I think, has certainly gotten his due, and obviously John Jones is amazing. So there's no shortage of praise for him there. But I think because some of the other guys have maybe asserted themselves or maybe been around a little longer, but it seems like Jose Aldo, like you said, I think he's kind of got lost in the shuffle a little bit, which is amazing because he's arguably the best out of any of them.
I mean, it's ridiculous if you look at it, because in the UFC, he had an amazing fight with Mark Hominick in front of 50,000 people. Then he beat Kenny Florian, who's been around forever. Now, granted, they were both decisions. Had that devastating knee against Mendez. Decisioned Frankie Edgar, which not very many people have done. And then he beat the Korean Zombie via, kind of injury and then TKO. But either way, I mean, if he finishes Florian and Edgar, I think it's a whole different story. But, Jose Aldo just keeps coming out, keeps putting beatings on guys, keeps getting victorious, and this guy, when he came over to the UFC, they gave him the belt, and he seems like he has zero intentions of giving it back anytime soon.
Yeah, Lamas definitely. I mean, he's a very tough guy. I think it will not be easy for Aldo to finish him. I think he can finish him, but kind of like like you mentioned with Darren Elkins, Ricardo Lamas has to bring his lunch pail to the octagon. He's going to have to try to outwork Jose Aldo, because if you're going to go in there and trying to be flashing and try to match what Jose Aldo can do, regardless of who you are, you're not going to win. You just can't do it. This guy is simply incredible, and that's what he's going to have to do. He's going to have to go there and try to outwork him. And if Jose Aldo does make a mistake, which doesn't happen too often, he has to pounce on it, much like he did in his fight to get this fight against Eric Koch.
Spot on, Jim. Spot on. Is that a Boston Red Sox hat?
Yeah, it's an old hat when they finally broke the curse from 2004.
Oh, that's nice.
So
I just checked
kind of a
it out.
collector's item of sorts.
Hey, before we get to the main event, so I'm on Facebook keeping up on all things MMA, and our good friends at VigilanteMMA.com, find them on Twitter and on Facebook. It says right now, live now, Beyond the Cage is discussing 169 and everything else. Turn it on now. And then in quotes, I'm still not sure why they never asked me to come on the show anymore. I'm perfect for video.
We just had him on our end of the year awards, like a couple weeks ago?
I don't know. And I mean, can I do any more plugs for the site?
Not really. I mean, you've done a pretty good job at it. All right. Since we're going off on tangents, quick question, Dave. Quick question. Who's faster, Jose Aldo or the Flash?
Ooh.
That's a tough one, right?
I don't. Hold on. To be completely fair, I have no idea. I have no idea.
All right, I just wanted to make a joke there. All right, well, let's get to the main event of the evening as Renan Barão will take on Uriah Faber for the actual Bantamweight Championship of the world, and this will be a rematch between the two from when they first fought at UFC 149 for what was then the interim UFC title. But with Dominic Cruz finally, I guess, relinquishing the title because of his injury problems, Renan Barão will have a chance to maybe get his due, so to speak, and become the actual Bantamweight champion. Looking at Uriah Faber, his record in the UFC, 6-2, currently riding a 4-fight win streak, and coincidentally, all those 4 fights were in the 2013 calendar year. His last fight was a victory over Michael McDonald at UFC on Fox 9, and 17 of his 30 career victories are by submission. Looking at Renan Barão, 6-0 in the UFC, currently riding a 21-fight overall win streak. His last fight was a victory to defend his interim bantamweight crown as he defeated Eddie Wineland at UFC 165, and 14 of his 31 career victories are by submission. And the first time these two fought, Dave, it seemed as though I think Uriah Faber maybe wasn't surprised, but he kind of sat back a little bit, and I think he was maybe looking to counter a little bit more. And Uriah Faber's usually the quicker individual in the fight. There are too many guys that are that much quicker hand speed wise than Uriah Faber, and I think he was surprised that Barão is just as fast, if not faster, and was able to get on him quickly and use those leg kicks and get in out of range, and Faber wasn't doing a good job of countering the Brazilian. And when then Uriah Faber tried to out-wrestle him, his leg was pretty much beat up, and it's really hard to take a guy down when that leg you're planting down in the ground is damaged. It's not as stable. And that's kind of what happened in their first fight, and Barão had a very masterful performance. And I think this time around, Uriah Faber will not go with that strategy, and he has to try to get up in Renan Barão's face. And Eddie Wineland kind of did that a little bit. Of course, you can't predict you're going to get knocked out by an attack like that, but I think it was working, and I think that's what Uriah Faber has to do. He has to try to get in the face, make Renan Barão uncomfortable, because if you're going to sit back against this guy and try to counter and do more of a traditional kickboxing match, it's apparent over his 6 UFC fights. There's a couple guys that have tried that, and they have failed miserably.
Yeah, this is a chance for Uriah Faber to get what he has wanted since he was back in the WEC. He wants that UFC belt, and this is his chance. I think taking it on a couple of weeks' notice was good for him. He had just fought, didn't necessarily receive a whole lot of injuries in his last fight. Was already in peak condition, work a little bit of cardio leading into this fight, and I don't think we're going to see a better Uriah Faber than what we're going to see come Saturday. He's got the coach is escaping Bang. He's got Bang Ludwig by his side. He's had a great year. I mean, everything's lining up for Uriah Faber right now. Um, will he come out victorious? I have no idea. Renan Barão is a very calculated and, man, trying to think of another adjective. Um, Renan Barão's tough. There's a reason why he hasn't lost since George H.W. Bush was in office. There's a reason for that. Um, he's really good. I know that's a terrible breakdown, but that's what I got. I think that Faber needs to be in his face, and the longer it goes, I think the better Faber's chances are in this fight.
Well, let's do some picks here. Unfortunately, maybe someone smarter than me, maybe you'll have to tweet me at Jim Graham or at Vigilante Juice how to get the music on here. But if we could get some Pride music, that'd be great. But unfortunately, I don't know how to do that, so we're just gonna go ahead with picks as a normal, Dave. And looking at the first fight of the evening, Jamie Varner against Abel Trujillo. Like we both said, I think it's going to be a fantastic fight. Very real chance of being fight of the night, but I'm going to go with, I think the guy, he's a little more well-rounded. I'm going to go with Jamie Varner to win this one.
Yeah, you got to go with Jamie Varner. I think his skill set is just superior in this fight.
At Fly